Tell me when to start, Al. Well, welcome everyone to today's session, Fighting for First Nations Justice and Sovereignty. First I'll introduce myself. My name's Sue Bolton. I'm a Socialist Alliance councillor in the city of Meribek, and I'll be chairing this session. I'd like to start by acknowledging we're on stolen land that was never ceded, land where there's no treaty. And like to acknowledge the Wurrung people as the rightful sovereign owners of this land, and recognise the ongoing struggle and fight for justice and reparations, and like to pay respects to elders past, present and future. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Before I introduce the speakers and talk about how the session's going to run, I'll just fill people in for people who've never been to Trades Hall before, just where things are located. So firstly, toilets are up here on the first floor, just behind to my left, and there are also some downstairs and in the loading bay. At the end of the conference, the loading bay downstairs on the ground floor is where food will be served, and there are many information tables. This session on First Nations justice and sovereignty, or fighting for First Nations justice and sovereignty, is part of the Ecosocialism Conference 2023. And this conference has been hosted by Green Left, and Socialist Alliance is a co-host. If you want to find out more about Green Left media or Socialist Alliance, you can talk to me or any of the other organisers you see around the place. There's also a contact list that'll go around during the session in case people want to stay in touch. So firstly, while this year has been dominated by discussions about a voice to Parliament, there are many, many, many outstanding issues. And a lot of First Nations activists and allies have been struggling around many issues over a long period of time, from attempts to close remote Aboriginal communities, removal of children, deaths in custody, lack of resources in remote communities, and many other issues. And this, and there's still not, like this year, in a sense, the voices, the debate over the voice has really squashed discussion about some of these issues. And it's very notable that after the referendum bill went through Parliament, the government announced that it was going to do something about deaths in custody and have real-time reporting. And this is like real-time reporting, yes, good as far as it goes, but what about implementing all of the recommendations of the Royal Commission into deaths in custody from the late 80s? What about all of that? So our two speakers, Lidia Thorpe and Joel Shackleton, will talk about how it can fight for genuine justice that goes beyond tokenistic measures. So Lidia is a Djab Gunnai Gunditjmara woman. She's represented Victoria in federal parliament since 2020 and is a First Nations senator from Victoria. But she's more than just a politician and a parliamentarian. Lidia has been active in the grassroots movement and on the front line for many years, and is part of the new generation of resistance, dating back, not sure when Lidia first got involved, but she comes from a family of activists in the grassroots movement. Joel Shackleton is a Gunditjmara man and a Koori organiser with the Construction, Forestry, Mining and Energy Union, and he's part of Koori Construction, which is there's a group of First Nations activists within the CFMEU who've been very active in recent times. So just firstly to tell people how we're going to run today. So we'll first have our speakers, and I'd ask people to leave your questions and comments until they finish speaking. And then after they finish speaking, we'll open it up to both questions and comments. People will be able to do both. The session will be live streamed, so I will ask people when it gets to discussion time to come up to the front to speak from this microphone so that people viewing on live stream can, get a good feel for things. There is some media present. Now, the media will only be here for the talks, not for the discussion, because we want to have a free, open, democratic discussion, and we don't want any distortions through the media. And just, well, we want to have our own discussion. We're activists and want to, all sorts of things to think about, and they're different viewpoints. Yes, no, and in between on the voice, but also different discussions about what sort of, how we build the movement for First Nations rights. So I'll open it up now, I think, to the speakers, and I'll make a couple of announcements after they finish, but Lidia is going to go first, and she'll speak for around 15 minutes, maybe shorter or maybe longer, but around 15 minutes, and then Joel will speak, and then we'll open it up to questions and discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Excuse the fancy hair. I'm in the middle of an interview for another TV program, so I wouldn't normally come so fancy and assimilated looking. First, I'd like to acknowledge, as Sue did, that we all are on stolen land. There's been no treaty in this country with its First People, so this land will always be stolen until we end the war on First Nations people and have a peace treaty. We're only one of a few Commonwealth countries on the planet that does not have a treaty with its First People. So I'd like to acknowledge all of our warriors of the frontier wars, particularly, who died fighting for this country. They died fighting for this country. No, they weren't Anzacs. They were the warriors of the frontier wars that held the line against the ships that arrived with their diseases, with their guns, who buried our children, who stuffed our children with mouths with dirt to suffocate them, and who buried our people alive. That's the first war that was ever declared on the shores of this country, was against this country's First People. The war that this country refuses to acknowledge. The war that this country has continued wounded warriors out there. And I'm there to speak for the wounded warriors and for the fallen warriors of the resistance. So I'll pay my respects to Wurrung, to the survivors of Wurrung and the other 38 nations in Victoria, who we know only have 11 seats around the Treaty Assembly table today out of 38 nations. So we've got a long way to go. And hopefully I can leave you all with something to think about. I saw the crowd out the front, and it was a bit of a pain in my heart, to be honest, to think that we've got so many do-gooding white people out there with their hands on their heart that think this is the right thing for us. It's a real slap in the face for all those warriors that have fought, who've died, to think that we're looking at a powerless voice that may give advice. Well, pat yourselves on the back who think that that's great, because it means nothing to our people. It means nothing to the elder I saw last week sleeping at the bus stop with his walker NAIDOC theme is elders, right? Isn't it? Aren't we meant to all feel good about that? Oh, Aboriginal elders, they're so amazing. They're so knowledgeable. You go to Queensland, you go to WA, it's an absolute disgrace. It's an absolute war still upon our people in this country. 23,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children stolen from the breast of their mother. And we want a powerless advisory board that we've got to grovel like poor little blacks. Grovel. Asking, please, sir, please, King Charlie, please, the colonisers, please, give us a powerless voice that's going to make everything better. We'll get our land back, get every kid out of the prison system, no more deaths in custody, no more destruction of land, water, air, sky, totems. Imagine that. Don't you think I'd be saying yes if this powerless body had a say in any of those things? Do you think the Parliament is going to let this group of hand-picked people sway them in their thinking? We can't even sway Labor to get away from coal. We can't sway Labor to implement the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. All they talk about is how their politicians were a part of it when it began. They don't want to know about implementation. They decide to announce that they implemented one of those recommendations. And what was it? Counting the body bags that come out of the prison system. That's what they agreed to. Out of every recommendation, they chose counting body bags. How is that going to stop deaths in custody? Just keep up with the count. When I walked into Parliament, I walked in with a stick, a message stick, with 462 deaths in custodies marked on it. Now, we have over 540 in the time I've been in the Senate. No one cares about deaths in custody. No one cares about the young fellas telling their brothers where the hanging points are in the cells. I was explained exactly how to do it when I went into the prison to talk to these young fellas. Hanging points is one of the recommendations that they're meant to remove. Labor don't want to know about that. Labor don't want to know about not having Medicare in prisons, so our people are dying of preventable diseases and deaths. That's another recommendation. They don't want to know about the recommendations to stolen generation. You know, we all patting ourselves on the back when Rudd said sorry. Felt nice, felt good, had a cry, and now we celebrate it every year. It's like, I feel like I'm up here doing a comedy. Like, we celebrate sorry every year, and the increase of incarceration rates of our children being taken away from their mothers has skyrocketed. So have deaths in custody. So has the destruction of land and water. How? How can we say yes to no power for First Nations people in this country? If we have power, you will have a future. I have the dirtiest coal-fired power station on my country in the Latrobe Valley. It's the dirtiest in the whole country. And who's the poorest, sickest people around that coal-fired power station? Gunnai people. My people. Having a powerless voice is not going to change that. What will change that is a treaty where we have equal power and equal say in this country. It is our country. We haven't ceded sovereignty, and we will never cede our sovereignty. The King says he is sovereign over our land and our waters and all of the resources of this country. King Charlie. He says he's sovereign. That's what the Parliament tells me every day as a sovereign black woman. And having a powerless voice is under supreme parliamentary supremacy at all times. We have to go to a referendum at a time that this country is divided and racist. And yes, I can say racist, and I mean it, because I've lived with it all my life, and now I'm seeing our people being demonised out there as part of the racist No campaign, which is only an example of what we still have in this country, the racism. It's good that it's coming out, because for blackfellas it's always been there. It's rearing its ugly head and it's making us all sick. But there is a progressive no. Progressive no. We're not one homogenous group. We don't, the progressive no don't believe in hand-picked yes people. The sovereign black movement who don't want this to happen, they're the ones that have been on the front line. All the hand-picked blackfellas you see out there, not one of them have been on the front line. It's why it's easier to go with what the government says. It's assimilation. It's putting us into a constitution that is only very new, 1901, compared to the oldest constitution on the planet, our constitution. The way the media carries on, it sounds like we were uncivilised, that we were wild beasts. Sounds like something the cook said when he lied to the king and said there's nothing there, they're just wild beasts. So the king said, take over then. We were wild beasts, disregarded. So they didn't conquer, they didn't treaty, and we didn't cede our sovereignty. 3 elements to take over someone's lands. The king and Cook didn't do that. No one's done it. Still, that's why we need a treaty. Why would we go into an Australian colonial constitutional document that has no regard for blackfellas, but also had no regard for women when it was established? And if you look at society today, you know, we're making small progress. But the Constitution, and the very presence of that document comes from racism and patriarchy. It comes from setting up white systems that cause harm. particularly to vulnerable people, particularly to those that are not white. White Australia policy was one of the first policies they brought in. What's different? What's changed for Aboriginal people? And I get, oh, you've got doctors and you've got lawyers and you've got this and you've got that. It's great. We've got to celebrate those things. But why has the incarceration, removal rate, suicide rate and destruction of land and water increased exponentially? Why have we got a climate emergency? Because of colonisation. They came over, they ripped the heart and soul out of this land, they poisoned our waters, and they continue to do that under the progressive Labor government, which is a joke. Fracking the Beetaloo. People on the Beetaloo, where's their voice? They won't even give them the microphone. And that's been a very big part of this problem in the last 6 years and beyond that, where we had the Recognise campaign, the black activists shut that down as quickly as it began because it was about constitutional recognition, putting the blacks into the white law book and saying, righto, we own you now, you're in. What's the point of a treaty? You're already in. John Howard always said, you can't treaty with yourself. What happens when we go into the Constitution? For what? No power? It just, again, seeing that crowd outside saddens me. Because it means that you've been sold a falsehood, you've been lied to. This so-called voice that's making people feel good has shut out grassroots voices right across this country. We tried to raise this at the Uluru Dialogue. We were shut down. We were told that we couldn't sleep in the hotel room. We were put out in the desert with a tent and no blankets. And I was threatened with tribal punishment because I wanted to talk about treaty. And there were about 30 of us, not 7 or 5 that the media says. And those people were from all over this country. And there was a convoy going up to Uluru because poor blackfellas couldn't get there. It's too expensive, it was invite only, they had it in the middle of nowhere, so it's inaccessible to the people who want to have a say. Nice, beautiful country, but it was all part of the agenda of shutting out the grassroots activists that have been on the front line all of their lives. They're not the ones saying yes. They're the ones that are continuing the fight for justice and continuing to ensure that this government, if they want to be seen to be blackfellas' friends, because they love wearing our earrings in the chamber and they love wearing the T-shirts and it makes them look like real deadly black allies. But they want to nail us into the colonial constitution where we may or may not give them advice. It's disgusting. It's offensive. It's offensive. We've got nearly 25,000 blackfellas that are homeless in this country. You know the stats. I'm not going to bore you with the stats. But what I'll bore you with is the fact that we need peace. We are the minority in our own country. We were once the majority. and through cleansing from the colonial system, wiping out the blacks, we're only 3%. So what hope have we got against 97% of this country who thinks we're going to take something away from them? We want to self-determine our own destiny. We want to become economically independent. We don't want welfare. We want a treaty that will enable us to decide our own destiny. We're being controlled by government every minute of our lives. The cashless debit card, like the same government who is saying to you, and they're coming up with all the lovely, churchy almost, stories of how wonderful this is going to be. It's a trick. It's a trick to assimilate and take away our rights to self-determine. Labor are already stalling on implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, something I introduced as my private senator's bill in March 2022. They don't want to know about that. They don't want to know about deaths in custody. They don't want to know about treaty. They don't want to know about child removal. They don't want to know about fracking the Beetaloo. They don't want to know about gassing Western districts and firing off sounds in the ocean that will kill instantly the wildlife. They don't want to know. This is, we'll just park that over there because that'll be one of those things that's not related to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And you already see the excuses coming out as to the things that aren't related to us. And Prime Minister himself said climate change. It's only things that are related to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Climate? So they continue to shoot himself in the foot with coming out with the reality of what this will ultimately look like. And I won't be campaigning for no, but I will be speaking freely about what is a way forward for this country. And we are long overdue for a treaty. Everyone knows the treaty song. Everyone's probably danced to it. Everyone understands a little bit about what it could do for us as a nation. But we have to have ambition from the government, and Labor have had the opportunity before with Hawke wanting treaty, Keating wanting treaty, but their own party stopped them because at the end of the day we are bound by the Crown. And the Crown is who we want to ultimately treaty with. They are the ones that stole the wealth out of our lands, the resources. They raped and pillaged not only our people but our country. So we want to have a conversation about that and some reparations so that we can ultimately self-determine what we want. I can go on, Jukan. How many Jukans do you know about, and how many Jukans are on the cards to be absolutely annihilated, never to be returned? The so-called progressive government we have now do not want to have that conversation. PFAS, They ignore the fact that we have these chemicals in our environment coming down on us every day through the rain that falls upon us. They deliberately exclude people who want to talk about the hard issues that everyone faces in this country. Then we've got native forests. I mean, if we want to talk about environment, ecocide goes hand in hand with genocide. And you put those two together and you have omnicide. And that's where we're heading. Because our constitution, the First Peoples' constitution of this land, is about caring for country. It's about caring for totems. It's about caring for water, caring for each other. No one goes hungry. No one goes without a warm bed at night. No one goes without the love of their people. That's what's in our constitution. I think this country would rather be part of our constitution than anyone else's. And that's what we need to be negotiating through a sovereign agreement with the invaders and with First People. I might leave it there. I have notes and notes, but I just wanted to express to you all that the Black Sovereign movement is alive and well right across this country. We don't want to be assimilated into the colonial document that has oppressed us for 200 years. We want something better, and we want something that will create real change in this country rather than being just the tokenistic little gammon advisors on the side that they may listen to. So thank you.
Thanks, Lydia. So we'll have Joel speak next and then we'll open it up for discussion. Thanks, Joel.
Yeah, I've got to follow that. That's, guys, I'd just like to pay my respects to the land we meet on today, the Wurrung, Wurrung. All our elders, past and present, always will be Aboriginal land. Oh, it's a good start, sis. You took them. Fireworks. Guys, I'm a rank and file member of the Construction, Forestry, Mining and Energy Union. I've been an organiser for 2 years. Proud Gunditjmara man from South West Victoria, and thanks for having me here talking. This woman here next to me, she's a cousin. She's beautiful. You can say what you want about her, but she's been black her whole life, and she hasn't changed since I've known her since a little kid. She has a special spot in my heart. Yeah, she gets up and does in front of everyone for all the hate, all the bigots, all the far right. I don't know how she does it. She's a machine. My grandmother's name is Eunice Wright. She was a beautiful woman. She was taken from her home on Lake Condamine in 1954 with her brothers and sisters. They were placed in the worst orphanage in the country's history, in Ballarat, where she was 9 years old, her brother was 5, and her sister was 13. We all know the unspeakable things that they've done to the children there, and you know, there's no how do you say this? Yeah, to this day we don't know. They don't talk about it, the old people, but the repercussions are still there. So we fast forward till today. Many years ago, my grandmother passed away in March 2020. Her last day on this earth, she petitioned down on Spring Street with Sis, with the other elders, fighting for redress from stolen gen. Now, she was one of the worst cases of stolen gen. She was in the chambers of Rudd when he did it. And to her very last dying breath on this earth, she fought for justice. Now, you can call me Labor hack but I'm not. I'm a unionist, yeah. I was born on this earth an Aboriginal man first. No one owns me, no union. So I'll fight in her honour for my members and the Aboriginal people here in Victoria, all right? As you can see out there, there's many, many construction sites you see in this site. 10 years ago, the government started an initiative called social procurement. On top of that social procurement is the Aborigines. It's all nice, all well. Part of that social procurement is every government contract in this state, where any state money is being spent, must have 3% Indigenous on the job. Well, I'll tell you what, just until 2 years ago, that was the biggest fucking rort known to man. Just when you go and see the next federal and state budgets come out and you see all the spending of the big pie charts you see on TV, and there's a section, massive spend on the Aborigines, all right, as they call it. None of that money goes to our mob, all right? Multinational corporations, CPB, John Holland, Lend-Lease, they all wrought the social procurement. And you know what? There might be some friendlies there, but they'd rather go and buy toilet paper and cups with deadly Koori dots and that on it and all deadly art than give a black kid a job from Melbourne, all right? It's the biggest rort known to our people. At the moment, in the CFMU, I'm pretty proud. We've got over 500 rank and file members. We started our Koori construction meetings 2 years ago, where it just was 6 of us. And 5 weeks ago, we had 100 rank and file young activists, elders, women, men. It was fantastic. All in the same room about local issues, good paying jobs, wages, conditions, what our people should be getting. You know, turning up to work, breaking the stigmas of being lazy, being black, drunks, alcoholics, drug addicts. Turning up, doing their 12-hour days. Aunties, uncles that used to change my ass as a kid. Kicking goals, earning good wages. When I asked the rank and file in the room how many apprentices they were out of that 100, it was 5. That's it, 5. So that means 95 people in that room earn over $100,000 a year. That has never been done in this state before, and there was no government intervention in doing it. Because until 2 years ago, all you had to have is be an Aboriginal business is be owned 51%. And what that is, you can, you know, when you old weatherboard houses you see, the weatherboards, that's called cladding in construction terms, right? All that is an ex-footballer that stands up in front of the business. He owns 51, 60, 70, 80% of the business. He got no money. He's got no money. He can't, bank won't lend him money. But the rich white fellow who wants to help the Aborigines, he'll give him money. And it's the biggest rort. Once you have that certification from the government body and the state body, which I won't name, I will, Gunnai Chamber of Commerce. Once you have that stamp from them and the federal body Supply Nation, you're then got to pay the government $10,000 and then you're on the social procurement register. Once you've got that tick off from all them bodies, you then can run government money, government funds, sand, concrete, timber, non-Indigenous labour, machines, all under the spend of an Aboriginal business. And not one black kid, auntie, uncle, gets a job out of it. So it's a credit to where this union I come from, and I'm a big fan of the Black Sovereign Labour Union movement, because we've got these young boys and girls. Our first ever CFMU Koori delegate was a female, Casey Edwards, Uncle Kennedy Edwards and Auntie Julie Phillips' daughter. Mate, she's kicking goals. We're going to start a fund for the mob where we pay for funerals and stuff like that out of people going to work. So we just want to break that cycle that never ends of third and fourth generation. Little things like having a car that starts when you turn the key and being able to put petrol in your car to get to work. These are the things our mob, faces. The the trauma from kids on drugs, alcohol, rehab. It's all right to go to rehab. It's all right if you're a naughty boy and, you know, like when I was a kid, you know, playing up. Not everyone can go to these corporate places. Construction's the last home for the naughty boys and the naughty girls of our community, where there is no judgment on your past. Come to work, buy a ticket, and feed your wife and kids and your family like everyone else. We don't want to take over, we just want our peace, all right? So I'd just like to thank everyone for having me today, guys. It's been an honour speaking, yeah. I'll keep it short and sharp. Yeah, thanks, sis, for inviting me and everyone here for having us, guys. If you see this stuff out in the newspapers, make sure you get behind it. This black cladding is the biggest fraud of Aboriginal businesses, and it's the new oppression of Aboriginal people in the state of Victoria. And where there's money, there's always a shifty white fella if he's trying to get to it, you know what I mean? And that's no disrespect to any good fellas in this room. But thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thanks, Joel. And what you just described about black cladding sounds like almost every reform you win under capitalism, the capitalists are trying to work out how to take it back off you, and with all these different sort of sneaky tricks. So thanks heaps for Lidia and Joel. We're going to have discussion first. I'm going to take a call list. We will actually send around a contact list. Chloe's got it up the back. For anyone who wants to stay in touch, we're going to have an organised discussion. So we'll take 3 speakers at a time, questions or comments, and then we'll get reply or response from... I've got a spare pen, Lydia, so don't worry. You can take that one if you like. Is that okay, taking 3 at a time? Sure. And then, so then we get to hear from a few people, and people should feel free, you know, to explore issues. You don't have to talk about the voice. You can talk about other aspects of First Nations justice and struggle and solidarity. So, you know, we want to have a good discussion about, you know, tactics, strategy, you know, and if people have got questions as well. The session will be live streamed, so be aware that if you're asking a question or making a point for discussion, it will be filmed and will eventually go public on YouTube, and all the media's out. Oh, good. So each contribution should be no longer than 3 minutes, and I'll give people a bit of a wind up at the end of 3 minutes. So that means we get through more people. And maybe I might just make a couple of quick announcements before I grab the speakers, just so that people know. So Green Left, that's hosting the conference, this is our newspaper. If people haven't seen it, it's downstairs on the front desk. You can get an individual copy or become a supporter. We've also got some leaflets downstairs, an introduction to Socialist Alliance coming up, and also in 2 Saturdays' time, there'll be a protest against nuclear submarines and this AUKUS military agreement that's trying to take us to war. And what could you spend $368 billion plus on? You know, huge amount of things. So now I'll start to take questions. So I've got Tim, then Pip, and then Hans at the back. Oh, sorry, I'll have another couple of rounds. So Tim, then who did I say next? Pip, and then Hans up the back. Don't worry, I'll do another round. Actually, come up here. Actually, if people could come up here, because we want to live stream it. So if you've been called, come and line up.
Thank you so much, Shux and Lidia. That was very excellent speech and very informative. I've got to leave shortly to go and cook the barbecue straight after this. I'm hoping that you're still around. We can talk a bit more later. My question is, as an activist, so My name's Tim Gooden and I'm a CFMU shop steward in Geelong, Wurrung country. And for the last 20 years, 25 years, I've been involved in every campaign that the unions have launched, whether it's 36-hour week, the AEST campaign, stopping fracking down that area, a whole range of things, mostly through as a Socialist Alliance activist, a union delegate, but also as the Trades Hall secretary. So on one hand, I think that this voice that the government has completely fucked it up, started too late, too little, not enough build up to it, lack of resources, and I'm really concerned that it's going to be the no vote will get up anyway. On the other hand, all the people I've worked alongside of for the last 25 years, whether it's Arnie Lynn McGuinness, the Edbridges from the Wurrung Cooperative, through to Arnie Jen Murray from up at Deniliquin, and even Jasmine at the Gunditjmara Centre, like everybody that I've worked with over this last period in Geelong, around Wurrung, they're all saying yes. Now, none of them are high flyers, particularly, you know, and Karina's getting there from Wurrung. She's running the show now, but so they're all sort of saying yes, you know, and to come out now as an activist on the ground, do I abstain? I don't want to vote campaign no, because there's half the fucking nutters on my job are fucking jumping on that, you know. And so it's just, like I'm not gay, but I campaign really hard for yes. Now, I don't know if it's improved their life much or not, but we didn't want the no vote to get up because the Duttons of the world and the Christian right and et cetera, were just going to make everyone's life a fucking misery for the next 20 years, you know? My concern is that the no vote gets up, we didn't do enough, and then it sets the movement back further, not because the movement's not fighting hard, yeah, right? But there'll be no progressive white fellas that'll touch it for the next 20 years, and I mean parliamentarians and that, right? And so that's my worry and fear, and for the people that are around me. So it's just hard to come out with an answer, you know, and I knew this was going to fucking happen. So if the no gets up, what sort of things we can do? And I didn't know about Uluru the way that you described it today, the Uluru statement, because I thought treaty was tucked into this process and it was going to happen. So it'll just happen. Labor's making it lazy and fucking long, et cetera, and it's just going to happen. But if you're saying it's not going to happen, then what do you think we should do after no gets up, after this year? What sort of things can we do that's going to make things better? I know it's going to be more hard work and more campaigning, but I'm just trying to work out what message can be put out there now if we're letting people abstain. So, sorry. And I know half the mob aren't even registered to vote in the Australian stuff, in the normal elections. Right? No, they don't even want to be part of that, part of Clayton. And it's hurting for them now, and I'm just trying to work out how we soften that or step the campaign up so there's something more concrete for people to hang their hats on. Thank you.
Do you mind if I take another two, or would you like to answer that straight away? Joel wants to answer this straight away.
Can I answer this one?
Yeah, go, you go.
Brother, I'll explain it to you like this, and CFMU all the way. How many unions out there have actually went and organised their members and actually asked their Indigenous members? Because at the end of the day, like Lydia said, why does 97% of the population have a go at what's good for three? All right? All these faults, and that what you want to say about Big John, he gave me the job 2 years ago. He said, there's the keys, you guys run it. Now, we've got a stage now where we've got other unions, plumbers, electricians, We've got ASU members coming to our Koori construction meetings, right, that are saying we don't support it for the sole reason, like when kids are still getting taken, it was Labor and Liberal. No government intervention is going to help us. It needs to be from us. And like this says, like they're just putting pressure on our union. Our union's position now from the CFMU side is they've got no position for the sole reason in 4 days' time when we have our Koori construction meeting, the union members will say what our position is on the voice. And I think it needs to be people that have come before me, elders, that are a lot wiser than me, to say the pros and cons. People like Uncle Gary Foley that have been dragged out of the Tent Embassy. That's who I listen to. I don't listen to these fellas that work for them organisations like what you said, because there's a thing in our community and many other communities called cartel mentality, where everyone knows about El Chapo. His family runs a cartel. It's the same in Aboriginal organisations. One family takes all the deadly good paying jobs, then it just trickles down to their families and the rest of the mob miss out. And they are relying on the government handout. So whatever the government's going to say, they're just going to be the lapdogs for them. They're not going to stand up and have a dip because they rely on that government money. So just what happens if it doesn't get up? I'm not qualified for that, but I'm not going to be the first generation to sell out the old people that come before me that actually had a real hard time, got called a black cunt, got called a coon, got dragged off, their kids got dragged off missions and stolen. I'm not going to sell them out for an inferior EBA, if you know what I mean, brother. Would you tell your members to sign an inferior EBA? You never would. Same as with me, for my Indigenous members. Guys, this is the agreement they want to give us. Nothing will benefit us, but if we sign it, we sign on to X amount of time. It doesn't lapse this agreement forever. That's why I say, boys, why would we sign it? You know what I mean? And that's the best way I can say to construction. The ABCC is the construction workers' enemy. The Constitution is that document for Indigenous people. That's the best way I can explain it, brother. I hope it helped.
Yeah, okay. Lidia will speak and then we'll go.
I'll just follow up as well. And look, thank you for your question. And it's a very passionate, hurtful experience for everybody. And I feel your heart, brother, because we're all heavy-hearted. The fact that this whole country is talking about what's best for us is hurtful to us. It's dividing families and it's dividing communities. But ultimately, a yes result or a no result will make no difference. Having a no result will not set us back. Set us back from what? Set us back from what? Over 500 deaths in custody. How far set back do we want to be? Suicides every day. The elders on the bus stop seats. And I was in Cairns 6 months ago for something. There was an elder sleeping outside Macca's. I got up to have a coffee at 6 a.m. before my meeting. And 2 white security guards were saying how disgusting she is and that she stunk and she was filth. I went down in my slippers and shorts and a bit rough around the edges, and they thought I was off the streets too, until I started swearing at them and telling them to F off and leave that old lady alone. That's a reality. So a no vote will make no difference. A yes vote will make no difference. What we have to do is fight for the ultimate goal, which is a treaty. You don't need a referendum for a treaty. It's a piece of legislation. You don't need a referendum to have extra Senate seats in Parliament. It's a piece of legislation. There's so much this government can do without going to a referendum. The money spent on this referendum would give most of those blackfellas who are homeless are home, you know? But the emotion, the racism, the heartache, the pain that we're going through, I think we should, you know, and I never agree with Dutton, but just stop, just pause. Let's learn the true history of this country, because most people in this country don't even know the history of this country. They've been denied so long through their own educational institutions that told them Captain Cook discovered it. So there's this perpetual lie that continues through our education systems, our universities, the systemic racism that happens in the hospitals, in the police stations. It's all from the same system, the colonisers' colonial patriarchy system that only harms. So there will be no difference. We have to fight for truth and we have to fight for treaty. I don't know where the Greenies have gone on climate. Like, where have they gone now that Labor's in? Where's all the rallies to save the planet? You know, where's our protesters gone? So I think we need to band together. We need to get back out on the streets. You know, I know people are still suffering from COVID, but it's now time to get back out there, because you can't have climate justice without black justice.
So I've got Pip, then Hans, then we'll have a response, then we'll have another round of questions.
Thanks very much, comrades. My name's Pip. I'm one of the co-editors of Green Left. We've tried to expand the discussion, I guess, around voice, and I'd like to first start by congratulating Lidia on what I think has been a tremendously important and tremendously difficult job, which is to tease out the boundaries that Labor has put on this discussion around voice. And I think for those of us that are involved as allies in the First Nations justice movements, wherever they are, that's the thing that's really sticking in our craw. It's the complete boundary around what yes is and yes isn't. And we can see, and it's the hypocrisy that we are just completely, you know, as you've outlined in your presentation, the hypocrisy that's really stuck in our stomachs, as Tim has sort of also explained, I think, too. I was really struck looking at the people, the First Nations activists who were in your media conference. I noticed SBS had the whole media conference online for a minute or two. It was about half an hour. And suddenly it was off. It was completely pulled from their website. I don't know why that was, but anyway, it was very interesting to hear those people. They're the people that we all struggle alongside of in the streets. I guess I feel that I'm not as pessimistic as Tim. I'm living in Sydney at the moment. I think the yes vote will get up. But as you said, I don't know that it's going to make that much positive difference. But Labor's going to have to wear that. I mean, I think at the moment my estimate is perhaps the one state won't get up is Queensland, and for lots of good reasons. But as you said, I think we need to start talking about how to continue the struggle now, right now, and keep talking, as you said, about the issues that need to be solved, because the hypocrisy has to be thrown back in their faces. Why aren't you listening to First Nations voices right now? The ones in Beetaloo, the ones in the Pilliga. Apart from, every other issue that has been raised. So I guess my main question is, apart from agreeing with you about the fact that we need to keep the campaign going in the streets and wherever we are, in the unions, how in your estimate would you start this treaty discussion? I know Victoria's having discussions around treaty. I'm not really across that, so maybe you want to comment on that. But even... because I'm wondering if it's a state-by-state issue, and how would you envisage, or have you thought about how we could start discussing that in this time that we have, those 6 months and lead up to yes, to start to actually raise that up as an issue with more concrete details. Thank you.
So, Hans?
Yeah, Lidia, I have to say I admire your determination, your fire in the belly. As my accent probably betrays, I'm a transplanted American. I've been in Australia since 2004. I'm a dual citizen. And I think the treaty is a place to start. But if you look at the history of Native Americans, there have been many treaties. Many of them have been broken. Some have been perhaps partially honored. Native Americans have tribal councils. Some of them are large, like those of the one of the Gunnai or the so-called Navajo. Others are quite small. Ultimately, all of this comes under the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is an agency of the federal government. And I hear you in your discussion for self-determination and economic independence. I support those ideas. But I'm an anthropologist, so I'm interested in the comparative approach. I'm also a colleague of Marcia Langton at Melbourne University, although Marcia and I often don't see eye to eye. She doesn't like Marxists. I'm a Marxist. She doesn't like environmentalists. I'm an environmentalist. I'm an ecological Marxist and eco-socialist. But I guess my question is, what lessons can First Nations here in Australia take from Native Americans in terms of both self-determination and economic independence, and even go further than that, because Native Americans still remain the poorest group, ethnic group, in the United States, in what I sometimes call the real evil empire.
Okay. Who would like to go first? Maybe Lidia and then Joel, if you want to, if Joel wants to say anything. Otherwise, just Lidia. Okay, all good.
Thank you for those questions. Where'd she go? Hit the nail on the head in terms of hypocrisy and the need to continue to protest and fight. We can't let Labor off the hook here. They're shaking our hand with this one and whacking us down with the other one. So they don't know which hand they're using half the time. And the only way we're going to overcome that is to continue to call them out and continue to fight back and continue to call for treaty and truth. How we do that is we need federal leadership. We need the Prime Minister, like his other two mates did back in the day. We need this one to say the same, that we want a treaty with First Nations people, and we need to set up the mechanisms to do that. Yes, there are state and territory treaties being talked about everywhere except for Tassie, South Australia, Queensland, WA are the only ones that aren't talking treaty. Maybe with a new Premier we might see some movement. But I think we could use those existing state and territory means that feeds into a federal process. What we need to be careful of with that, though, is that we don't go down the same track as the Victorian treaty process, which was hijacked by the bureaucrats and the government and dictated to as to what we could do and what we couldn't do. And I know that firsthand because I was part of the original working group. And why we came to treaty in Victoria is because we had a community meeting with over nearly 100 or 200 people that were asked by the Labor government whether we supported constitutional recognition. And the unanimous vote was, no, we don't. And what do you know? here we are today. But they did do the right thing and follow treaty and followed the mandate from that meeting. But what they've done since is they've excluded too many nations, and that's really created some disharmony amongst our people. So, as I said earlier, 11 nations out of 38 nations. If you look at the language map of Victoria, you might have seen that around in buildings, you see 38 language groups. But then you go to the Treaty Assembly and you only see 11 sitting around the table. One we got rid of because we called that corporation out for being dodgy and trying to earn a buck from cutting down Wurrung trees, $1 million a tree to be precise. So we called them out and they got shot down off the Treaty Assembly, and that took it to 11, but originally it was 12. And they are not representative of the people, of the traditional owners. We have to remember corporations, native title corporations are just that. They are instruments for the process. It does not mean that we are giving our free, prior and informed consent to those land councils or those corporations who are ultimately making the decision and doing the dirty deals with the developers or the mining companies. That's the disharmony you see, and that is how racist native title is. It forces us to negotiate. It doesn't give us any rights. We're just forced to negotiate. And so you have our land councils and our corporations sitting down with mining companies. The National Native Title Conference that I attended at the MCG, it was so extravagant. It was like going to the Royal Melbourne Show, and you could go to all the mining companies with all their wares. And all due respect, brother anthropologists, the room was full of them and full of lawyers. And the blackfellas were the poor ones. So native title is not land rights. Native title is racist. And so all state and federal governments rely on the corporations and the land councils to just do their job. And that is to give consent. And that's why we're in the mess that we're in. In terms of treaty at the local level, I think it needs to be treaties. And if we look at the Waitangi Treaty, there are clans or nations that refuse to participate in that treaty, and that's their self-determining right. But we have clans and nations around this country that should have their self-determining right to say they want to participate or not. That's self-determination, that's free, prior and informed consent, which is part of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Two very important parts of that declaration, which British Columbia has has a difficult time on free, prior and informed consent. In fact, most of the world who are trying to implement that United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People are all having problems with their countries on free, prior and informed consent because they don't want blackfellas or Indigenous people to have that, which is outrageous. But we have to learn from the broken treaties, and we have to go in not at war. We want to go and sit as equals at the table and negotiate a settlement. So as a Gunnai, Gunditjmara woman, I may sit down at my local level and say, as part of, with my elders' consent and guidance, we want this coal-fired power station shut down in the next 5 years. And we want our people employed to help do that. And we want our people employed to benefit somehow instead of dying from it. So it's real power. And I know that's one thing that keeps coming up is treaties around the world do get broken. But we could have a treaty of the 21st century We have a blank canvas in this country, which I only see as an opportunity. We could rewrite the Constitution so it does respect women, it does respect trans, it does welcome asylum seekers, and it does acknowledge our First Peoples as the sovereign people of these lands. I don't think that that's too much to ask for. But we could have a treaty that does that, and for clans and nations that don't want to participate, because I know that there will be a sovereign movement that just says, we're not even going to treaty with these fellas. We've planted our spot here and we're not moving. We never have. That's okay. That's their self-determining right. No one should be forced to negotiate, and it should only be open for those who want to. Just finally, I did meet... there are a few sovereign movements around this country where Aboriginal people are living on their own land, and the Yidinji mob that I met with recently have their own police force, they have their own governance, and they deal directly with the Crown, and they do not acknowledge the colonial occupation here. And there's nothing that the colonial occupation can do once you assert your sovereignty on your own land. And that's a hidden, dirty little secret that this country won't want you to know, because the more we do that, the more they are at risk of having their sovereignty questioned or challenged in any way. So we have a lot to learn, and they're all on board with this. We are talking about to Waitangi mob, and we've been talking to British Columbia, particularly through the Senate inquiry on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So I hope that helps. But also, I don't have all the answers to treaty, because it's got to be self-determined by the people. What works for me may not work for Ned Hargraves at Yindamu. You know, he just doesn't want any guns in his community, and that shouldn't be too much to ask for after the cops shot his nephew. You know, it's basic human rights and it's basic peace principles that we need.
I'll take another 3. So I've got Petrina, I had Meredith, I've got Jonathan. We might only have, I'll see how we go, we might only have room for 3. I'll see if we can squeeze one more in, but Petrina.
We'll make our answers short. I'll make my answers shorter. I'll try and
Hi, Petrina Harley. I'm a member of Socialist Alliance. I come living on the lands of the Wurrung people in WA. Much solidarity and respect. I especially want to thank you as a mother of a trans woman. I took on the Posey Parker tour myself, had a bit of a tussle with their media. But yeah, it really struck me to see your struggle for, your solidarity for trans people and standing up to that hideous right-wing movement. So I guess I wanted to say I've been troubled by this from the start. I think it's been a shit show right from when I first heard about this voice, and maybe it's because I'm from WA, where there are quite heinous brutalities happening as we speak, but all the grassroots activists that I have been standing alongside are all voting no. So the Invasion Day rally, every single speaker was dead against the voice, and I think part of this is so campaigning against Scarborough Gas. We've got the Murrujuka rock art there, 160,000-year-old rock art that is being eroded from the activities of Woodside. Of course, they're now proposing fracking in the Kimberley as well as the NT, and if that happens, they're literally going to build a pipeline from Broome to Karratha, and then from Karratha across the coast. Our whole northern peninsula will just be an industrial wasteland. So I guess as a socialist, we come from, we believe grassroots protest, and history has proved that grassroots protest has been the only action that has made any real progressive change. It's never come through a parliamentary process. And so I guess I agree very much with Lydia's stance, and I guess our fear, of course, is that the no progressive no vote is going to be completely drowned out by the racists. So I guess I'm asking you, I know you spoke about boycotting the voice as a tactic, which I personally will probably end up doing. But I guess, yeah, I just wanted to say to all of us as activists from that grassroots, it would just feel like a real kick in the guts to the Aboriginal activists that we have stood alongside to say to them, no, this is where the power is, change comes from the streets, and then say, oh, but, you know, just in case, maybe we should do this compromise and, you know, put our faith in the parliamentary process. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mary? Oh, did you have your hand up? Oh, sorry, I didn't notice, Bram. I'll put you up. Yeah, don't worry, I've got you in line. Oh, Meredith, Jonathan, and then Bram.
Oh, I didn't really want to say much. All I really wanted to say was, you know, all respect to you, and particularly with the kind of level of demonisation and attacks. And I just want to say, I'm going to cry like Tim, that, you know, you go with our support and solidarity, and keep up the strength.
Enough cuddle?
Yes.
Okay, Jonathan.
So usually I have notes and I have nothing to take notes on, so I'll probably forget something, but anyway. So I live on Yidinji country and work on Irukandji country in Cairns in northern Queensland. First thing I wanted to say was actually about unions and who's asked their members, because I'm a member of the NTU, and our NTU Policy Council actually had opposed this voice. I have to say, I think it was... Everything's always a little bit fudged in this regard, I'll admit. I think they were posing on the basis that they wouldn't necessarily have to answer the question concretely. Okay, but you'll get a feel for... but that's not saying it wasn't serious. So then, of course, it has come to this referendum, and they actually went out there. We went and the union went and surveyed his members, and basically they were split pretty much down the middle. There was a little section that said they were opposed it regardless. But mainly they were split between those who were saying, no, we still want to keep going with the focus on treaty, which has been what the union's been saying for a long time, and some that said they were going to support it. So the decision was to actually say, well, if you want to support it, there's a Unions for Yes campaign, you go to there. We're going to keep putting treaty up front on the stuff we put on up about this, but we'll have the stuff about the voice referendum happening. So that's the position they've taken. Okay. As I said, it's a bit fudgy to me, but it's trying to keep to that treaty focus. I think that's true. Okay, the second thing. Okay. One thing is going to be more demoralising than any sort of no vote for all of us, I reckon. That's not actually raising our voices about the need for sovereignty. That's the most important thing. If we shut up about that, that's the thing that really is going to fail us all. So that's the first thing I think we have to say, and I think we can see that that's hopefully been avoided and will continue to avoid it, and that's a good thing. On the other hand, why are we in this situation? Look, if you read the words that are proposed, I guess you can say the words don't talk about sovereignty. The word's not there, if I remember correctly. But the truth, I think, about what the Labor Party is engaged in here is they are drawing into question the question of sovereignty and treaty, of not talking about it by trying to substitute this for it. And we need to say that as well. That's the other thing we have to say. All right, the third, the last thing I want to talk about. Queensland. Now, Queenslanders actually basically had the same genetics and anatomy as the rest of us. So I don't know why we should peculiarly think Queensland is going to vote against this. But I mean, there's a certain amount, look, racism is quite strong there. That's a bit blunt. Although, you know, it takes different forms. I mean, we've got a lot of the stuff about so-called youth crime at the moment. It's actually, it's actually where we're taking part with others in opposing the building of new youth detention centres, basically locking up kids, and it is basically black kids. The numbers just show that to be the case. When we do that, and the activists come, and a lot of them are opposed to the voice, but they also say they're very tired. They're tired of struggle, the older ones at least, and it's fair enough. You can see why, because they're continually up against it, continually up against people who basically say, oh, we'll have a boarding house or something, new form of stolen generation. That's what that is. Because they actually say, oh, we'll have a boarding house and the kids that are working will be there, but they can't have their families there, they can't have their friends there. It's a stolen generation form and a new type. So they keep resurrecting the different forms of white Australia here. If there's a question, I don't expect a complete answer to this, but I think the question we have to keep asking ourselves is, how are we going to build the political force that will keep sovereignty and all the other kinds of issues that Lidia and Joel talked about today, because it's in the workplace and it is out in society as a whole, get on the front foot and actually try to change things.
Just quickly on sovereignty, people don't understand sovereignty. They don't, it's just an unfamiliar word. People understand treaty, and now they understand, well, they think they understand voice, but they don't really know what the repercussions of voice is in reality. But if we can work together on educating the rest of the population in this country on what sovereignty actually is, and that there is a king in another country that says that he is sovereign to these lands and these waters. I think the more people realise that, the more people will understand that our sovereignty is here. It never left here, and you can't just come and put a flag in someone else's country saying that you are sovereign, because sovereignty is our blood and bones are in the earth, in the water, and in every living being on our country. So the waterways are we look at this country like our mother, and that's how we want the rest of this country to look at, the rest of the population to look at this country, like your mum or your grandmother. You've got to love your mother. You've got to nourish, you've got to care, you've got to feed. All of the things, we have to do the same to what provides nourishment to us, and that's the land and the water. The water, in our way, is the blood that runs through the mother's veins. You kill that water, then the mother will die. Fracking is poisoning the blood in our mother's brain, in our mother's blood. And it's fracturing the body that keeps it all together. Uranium is something that should never, ever, ever be taken out of the ground, because that is something very dangerous. Blackfella Way, bad things happen when you take that out of the ground. It's there for a very good reason.
So Bram is our final question or comment, and then we'll get wrap-up comments from the speakers.
Hello, my name is Bram Heinrich McPartlin. I'm, I guess, an emerging disability activist. I first of all wanted to say that the tokenism and outright exotification of the Indigenous community in Australia is frankly disgusting. It's terrifying to me to see that the Indigenous rights movement in Australia is lagging so far behind a lot of Indigenous rights movements globally. The other thing I wanted to say was there is a absolutely understandable and absolutely justified fear of white people in a lot of Indigenous disabled groups, Indigenous movements in general, because traditionally white people have been fair weather friends. I'm very well aware of that. With that in mind, is there any way to boost and encourage the voices of specifically Indigenous disabled people in a disability movement? Do you have advice on that? How can we prove ourselves to be more effective allies And I guess what sort of activism can we, as disabled people who can't necessarily always be boots on the ground, what can we do to support things like the Wurrung Embassy, the Tent Embassy, other activist movements that were mostly feet on the ground?
Thank you.
So which order would you like to go? Lydia or Joel? Whichever way. And just any final wrap-up comments. It doesn't have to be in response to the questions. It could be extra points you feel would have been left out of the discussion tonight.
Thank you. I just got to remember because I don't write things down. Sis, just your question, when you spoke, it sort of said to me, you know, the hit the streets and stuff like that. It's, in my head, we still have, like as a unionist, we, you know, lobbied hard to get the federal Labor into government. We still have the most draconian strike laws in the country, in the world, under the, I think it's the UN right to strike. I said, so for me as an official of the CFMEU, if there's a death on site and I walk on that site without filling out my paperwork right, or I don't show a permit, and being a blackfella too, I thought, well, you know what, all I need is something from Wurrung to say, here, bros, you can come on here, but I can be fined a personal payment fine of $40,000 just to go and see an Indigenous worker. Or if there's a racial vilification thing on site, I need to go and ask the white supervisor if it's okay for me. So we sort of still need to make them aim up too with their right to strike, because at the end of the day, we got them elected, and the right to strike is a basic human right for us all, and none of them, the same sis. My Koori cousins married Noongar boys, and they've got a big tribe over in Bunbury, and they were Koori educators over here in Melbourne. Their experience over in WA was putrid. They are so far behind. They are the deep south in America, but it's just 4 hours west. You know, it's not right. Sis, my daughter's ASD. She's 6 years old. She's the apple of my eye. She's a non-verbal autistic, and you're fighting the fight for her. So it gets me a bit choked up now. I'm nearly going to cry. She's my baby girl. I don't know how we can go on forward with activism, but you just keep fighting the fight for her, because love and respect coming your way. I'm looking, I'm tearing up, my baby girl. Love yous. Thank you.
I suppose that, just thinking about your question, when I was growing up, we were like just one mob, and trans mob, like disability mob, we were all just one mob. There wasn't called trans then, and we didn't talk about disability because we just looked after each other as blackfellas, and we're all just different. And we were celebrated for that difference and loved and cared for the same way. But it has got harder, I think, for people with disabilities, and that there's no excuse anymore to silence your voice. It is a difficult space for blackfellas with disabilities to enter those spaces, because it's hard enough as a blackfella to enter a white space, let alone blackfella. And I talk about this because of people in my family and my grandkids who've got disabilities. It's not a safe space, but I know that there are a number of black activists with disability who are really fighting hard in that space. Jodie, and forgive me, her surname's escaped me right now, but she runs a consultancy for deaf people, and she'd go around to communities right across the country and teach our kids Auslan, because a lot of our kids in communities just pick up their own sign language and just survive. And she goes around and corrects all of that for families and and educates the interpreters on how to do language in Auslan. So she's doing a brilliant job. I would say, you know, we just need to create a safer space to and invitations, you know, and not to a formal agenda meeting, but to let's just have a yarn and try and connect and see how we can move forward together, rather than we invite you because you're the blackfella and we just need a token. And I'm not saying that you'll do this, but you would know yourself with a person with disability that they, you know, sometimes it can just be a ticker box. So that's where genuine conversations and connection happen. And I think I'm more than happy to help connect you into those spaces. Yep.
So before we make another thank you to our speakers and finalise the session, I think just going out of this room, basically, regardless of how people vote, don't vote in the referendum, the critical thing is action on the ground. That's got to be the critical thing. And even Joel mentioned about, you know, EBA, sort of like, you know, substandard EBA agreement and all of that. Even there's the issue of, regardless of what happens, so say if the voice does get up, or even say if a treaty gets up and it's not honoured. And a lot of unionists have the experience of where you win an EBA, which is not honoured by the boss. And an EBA is only as good as workers' ability to take industrial action and defend their rights. And in reality, that's what all of these issues relate to, treaty and all of these issues. We have to really dedicate ourselves in this country to really build a strong on-the-ground movement. And that's really the only guarantee. And in a lot of ways, it's a shame that the debate around the voice has pushed discussion about how we're going to stop deaths in custody, how we're going to win all of these rights. It's sort of pushed that off the agenda into just yes or no on the voice. And in a lot of ways, I think our responsibility as activists this year, going forward out of this room, is to actually start to get people talking about and hopefully mobilising for you know, for rights, for First Nations rights, for treaty and all of these things, and to try and stop deaths in custody and try and get the recommendations of the Royal Commission into black deaths in custody implemented. We've got to actually keep that fight going and not get totally distracted by the yes and no on the voice, because that's what Labor's been able to do. Labor and Dutton, actually, both of them. They've been able to sideline the discussion about First Nations rights and shovel everything into yes and no on the voice. And so that's got to be our pledge coming out of this meeting. So I'd like everyone to thank our speakers, both Lidia and Joel, very much. And just the last couple of announcements, definitely keep a lookout for Green Left, because we're going to keep platforming First Nations voices. Hopefully we can get an interview with Lidia coming up. We have done some before. But we are platforming the activist voices, First Nations activist voices, not the bureaucrat voices. They get plenty of airtime, but it's the activist voices we want to interview and give a hearing to in Green Left. And that's also why Green Left and Socialist Alliance have invited Lidia, this is the second time now, to public meeting this year. So we want to actually, you know, flesh out these discussions. Lydia, and so definitely welcome people to the Introduction to Socialist Alliance. It's happening in Thursday in Melbourne. Leaflets up the back. And Lydia mentioned that the climate movement had gone silent since the election of the Albanese government. And that's true. We have noticed that too. But if people want to mobilise around that issue, and you're in Victoria, our rally is called No Nuclear Submarines, Fund Essential Services and Real Climate Action, and it's not next Saturday but the Saturday after, the 15th of July at 11 a.m. So now there'll be a short afternoon tea break. There are some cakes and snacks downstairs, and then the next session is starting at 4 o'clock, reconceptualising revolution in the age of the climate emergency. And the speakers for that are Farooq Tariq from Pakistan, Liam Flanardi, who is a member of the Greens, and Susan Price from Socialist Alliance. So that'll be in this hall here. Thanks very much. Oh yeah, Lydia wants to say one last little thing.
And my website just got launched this week or last week, so lidiathorpe.com.au. So go to it. If you want more information, like to keep up to date, there's a way that you can do that. And if you want to donate to the Black Sovereign Movement, there's a button there, and I just hope it works. Thanks.